So let's go back in time and take the audience back to Aaron Rodgers' childhood. What do people need to understand about Aaron and his upbringing and who he was back then to kind of better understand who he is today?
I think the center piece of his childhood was really the church, the neighborhood church in Chico, which was part of the Christian Missionary Alliance. It's an evangelical religion, and his mother particularly was very devout. And she said everything we did as a family was a prayer project. And Aaron actually never really connected with the church. He had a religious group that met weekly called Young Life, and he liked that a lot. But he didn't like church, and ultimately he rebelled against his Christian upbringing and became non-religious. He became spiritual, but not religious. And that was part of the family estrangement, at least at the beginning, but not so much now as it's running up on, unfortunately, on 10 years. But it really was a happy childhood with his two brothers. They were playing sports all the time. Basically, their parents, particularly their mom, was taking them from one game to the next practice, to the next game, to the next practice. And his older brother, Luke, who was a big, strong, athletic kid, they had a lot of battles, just as you would expect, an older brother and a younger brother. Then Jordan, the youngest, came along later. But it was a happy childhood. They didn't have much in the way of money. They had enough to get by. And they spent Aaron did part of his childhood in Oregon when his father went to complete his studies to be a chiropractor. And he was a great young baseball player and just overall athlete. But his dad thought he would be a Major League Baseball player when he grew up. And they moved back to Chico, California from Oregon just before Aaron went into high school. They allowed him to play football for the first time in eighth grade because of contact concerns and injury concerns. And yeah, he became a great high school football player. The problem was that Division I recruiters never went north of Sacramento, and Chico is north of Sacramento. So he was not seen, he was not recruited, and it really bothered him a lot. And here's a kid who was a great quarterback, and he had 1310 on his SATs, and he was forced to go to the local community college. And so you see the beginnings of that chip on his shoulder that grew into a boulder, basically. He was misevaluated and underevaluated every step of his football life. But the junior college experience was a very good one. It gave him a platform to showcase his skills and for Division I coaches to see him. And obviously the coach at Cal, Jeff Tedford, saw him while looking at another player, tight end Garrett Cross, and he offered him a scholarship. And the rest is history. But I will say this, when I was sitting with Aaron in Malibu, looking around at his estate on the Pacific Ocean, it struck me that he's really a self-made first ballot Hall of Famer, really a self-made man. Nobody ever handed him anything. Probably doesn't get enough credit for that he created this Hall of Fame career through the singular force of his will and talent and work ethic. And that should also be discussed more often than it is.
So to that work ethic point, I have a quote pulled from the book here that really stood out to me. So this is when Rodgers, Rodgers would go online and go to rivals.com and look to see if there was a scouting report on him. And most of the time, actually, every single time, there was no scouting report on Aaron Rodgers. To your point, he wasn't being scouted. As someone who grew up in Sacramento, I can attest to the Chico part of the story where, not too many people venture out there. But so Rodgers didn't see himself scouted, and he said, and I quote, "It doesn't matter because those guys are out there and they think they got it made. I'm going to wake up every morning before school and work out. I'm going to stay after school and work out. I'm going to throw 3 times a week with my buddies. And when those guys are enjoying the top of the list, I'm going to be out there outworking them and know at some point it's going to catch up." So to your point about being a self-made man.
Yeah, and so he doesn't get a scholarship at all out of high school. And one thing that really helped him was baseball. Actually, his senior year, his coach, who had been drafted by the Mets, and he didn't make it in the big leagues, but Ron Souza was extremely instrumental in his development because after senior year of football, no scholarship offers, he barely got any Division II or III interest, and some JUCOs were interested in him, but he was thinking of giving up football. And his coach, his offensive coordinator, the guy he respected, he was one of the most respected coaches in the area. Souza said, "Why don't you play baseball again? You haven't played since Well, I think eighth grade, right? And so Aaron decides to play again and go on the mound. He was a very good pitcher, and he said it. Playing baseball and pitching and having success brought back his competitive fire as an athlete. It had been doused. It had been extinguished. And that really brought him back and put him in a good frame of mind going into his football season at junior college at Butte. And yeah, and even in the draft, because he was supposed to go number one a week or two before the 2005 NFL draft out of Cal. And it was his dream to be the next great quarterback for the 49ers. That was his childhood team. He idolized Joe Montana and Steve Young. He wanted to be the next great 49ers quarterback. And of course, he plunges in the draft. He doesn't go number one. They decide to take Alex Smith, and he falls all the way to 24. And he becomes the first reality TV show, really, at the NFL draft. That was the first day that YouTube had a video uploaded to it, and it's kind of fitting. This was the first draft reality show for the NFL, the humiliation of Aaron Rodgers as he fell to 24 while the cameras captured his every frown and look of dismay and disgust even. So he got booed by Packers fans when they announced at the atrium in Lambeau Field that he was the pick at 24. Brett Favre was not exactly neighborly to him his first couple of years in the league, so he had to overcome a lot. He really did. And had absolutely nothing handed to him, and that should be certainly a part of his narrative for sure.
I certainly want to get into the draft. As we were joking around before this, I'm a huge 49ers fan. So that moment in 2005, even though I was young, is still seems fresh in my mind because I was certain that the Niners were going to take Rodgers. And as a 49ers fan, it's hard not to think what could have been with Rodgers and, how much success we could have had with him at quarterback instead of, Alex Smith and then Kaepernick, even though, we had some success with them. Rodgers was on a whole different level, obviously, and continues to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But before we get into the draft and some of the finer details there, I want to go back to his days at junior college and a man by the name of Craig Rigsby, who you called one of the more instrumental figures in shaping Rodgers' career trajectory. What can you tell us about Craig Rigsby?
Craig Rigsby is like a Charles Barkley-esque figure in Aaron's life. He is a storyteller. He's gregarious, bigger than life. And yeah, he talks like a used car salesman, and Aaron can't control him. And in fact, when I met Aaron for the first time at the start of this process, that little 3-minute exchange we had on his introductory day with the Jets, he did say to me, if you talk to Craig Rigsby, just remember that he doesn't let a fact get in the way of a good story. So Rigsby saved his career. And the other coaches on staff, they had another quarterback who had been at Butte in the program for 2 or 3 years, and it was his turn to be the starter. But Rigsby saw something special in Aaron as a freshman, and he said, no, we're not doing that. Aaron's better than this kid already, and a few weeks into the season, he's going to be much better than this kid. And Rigsby was right. And so he gives Aaron the platform he needs to showcase his talent and to prove he's always been a Division I player. He just got missed. And Cal came in and took him away. Rigsby said that, and if you just think about how amazing it is that he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, that his entire high school recruiting experience really boils down to the local community college coach who lived like 5 houses away, walking to his front door, knocking on the door, entering, sitting in the living room, and trying to convince Aaron's mother, Darla, that her son, who's a great quarterback and scored 1310 on his SATs, that he needs to go to the local community college. She wanted absolutely no part of that. She said, my son is not going to community college. But that's exactly where he ended up. And it was really the best thing that ever happened to Aaron, in large part because Craig Rigsby saw something special in him, saw an opportunity to play him right away and not play the incumbent. That would be the easy thing. And frankly, I think the vast majority of coaches would have done that. Let's start the season with Brian Botts, who was in place for multiple years in the program. It's his turn to start. But no, Rigsby said, we're not doing that. We're going with the more talented kid. And Rodgers is a star, and that's really where I think his football career was saved. I think without that, I'm not sure what becomes of him. He certainly doesn't become an NFL great, an all-time great. And I have him now among my 5 or 6 best quarterbacks all time, and he's got a chance to add to that legacy with the Jets.
So after Butte Junior College, Rodgers gets recruited to Cal, like you mentioned. And one of the more defining moments in his career at Cal was that famous game against USC, where he absolutely tore USC's defense apart, only to fall short at the end. But there was a very successful coach on the other side at USC, a man by the name of Pete Carroll, who, again, as a 49ers fan, very familiar with Pete and some of his teams, obviously with the Seahawks. But Pete said after the game, and you mentioned it in your book, basically it wasn't that Cal lost. USC survived essentially the onslaught from Rodgers, and Carroll was quoted saying that guy is freaking amazing. Do you view that as the defining moment in Rodgers' Cal career?
Yeah, I do. And to lose that game against USC when he completed 23 straight passes was a tough pill to swallow. But USC was loaded, obviously, with NFL players all over that defense. And yeah, the interesting thing about Rodgers' career at Cal is that a lot of coaches and scouts thought he looked robotic in his dropbacks, and he kept the ball up near his ear. And he wasn't this loose, mobile, athletic player that he became at Green Bay. So that might have hurt him on draft night. That day against USC in the Coliseum, that's really the day I think where people thought this is the number one pick in the draft, even though Cal lost that game. And Cal should have been in the Rose Bowl that year. They hadn't gone in forever, and Texas and Mac Brown really politicked their way into the Rose Bowl that year, but Cal deserved to go. And so another time, Aaron got slighted, and he doesn't forget any real or imagined slights at all, and he used that as fuel in his career. And although San Francisco beat him a number of times in the playoffs, he said that he would make the Niners regret that choice at that number one to go with Alex Smith, and I think he did. And obviously now as a Hall of Famer going in on the first ballot, it's hard to make a case that Alex Smith was the right guy there at number one. But yeah, there were concerns. And one thing that the 49er contingent looked at was that style of play, and also the history of Jeff Tedford quarterbacks was not a good one in the NFL. But the ball near the ear and the robotic look did count against Aaron. The Niners head coach at the time, Mike Nolan, told me that he was clear, and that Mike Nolan's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in sports, and yet he was perturbed that he had Mike McCarthy as his offensive coordinator for 1 year. And the Niners finished dead last in the league in offense, and McCarthy still got the Packers job. Not only that, McCarthy's one of the people who talked Mike Nolan into drafting Alex Smith. Now McCarthy benefits by getting Rodgers in Green Bay after finishing dead last in offense. Nolan gets fired eventually in San Francisco, and McCarthy wins the Super Bowl with the quarterback he didn't want in San Francisco. So Nolan was not thrilled with the way that all played out, but yeah, the one thing I'll say about McCarthy is he did realize his mistake. Obviously, once he started coaching Aaron, he could see how great he was. But he got him to lower the ball and made him a more athletic player and really turned him into a franchise player. A lot of the narrative about the McCarthy-Rodgers relationship is really negative in hindsight. But they won a Super Bowl together. You can't take that away from either man. And McCarthy did contribute a lot to his development as a franchise player.